So our first goal when we see the problem is just like our first goal was yesterday. So when we see the problem, is it allowed to equal negative 10m? So nobody should have their Chromebooks out right now because you are participating right now. You're going to get your Chromebooks out to do your notes in a little bit, but all the Chromebooks should be closed. So Isaiah, close the Chromebook. Close it. All right. So should the problem equal Are we ready? Should the problem equal negative 10m? No. So what should we do? We want it to equal 0, and how do we do that? Add the 10 to the other side. So we're going to say plus 10m, and so now the right side equals 0. Does the 10m get to add to the 3m squared? Are they like terms? 3m squared and 10m, are they like terms? No. So they both have m's, but one is an m squared and one is an m. That means they're different. So we don't add them together. So when we write this down, which one gets written first? The 3m squared gets written first. 3m squared, okay, then a positive 10m, and then last we're going to write the positive 4. Okay? What number are we going to use for A? 3. Okay, so A is 3. What number are we going to use for B? 10. Brayden, you got to take the earbuds out, or are you going to bring them up here? And what number are we going to use for C? 4. Okay. So we have x equals, and the formula is written at the top of the notes, negative b plus or minus. So if we start writing out what our formula is, we have negative b plus or minus. So what should I be writing? Negative b plus or minus. Negative 4? Negative 10. Okay, so negative 10 plus or minus, and then I'm going to have a big square root sign. And then I'm going to write b squared. So what comes next? 10 squared. Minus 4. The 4 is always there. So minus 4 times a, 3, times c, 4. And then that whole thing is going to be divided by 2 times a. Two times a. Two times 3. Okay. All right. So what do we plug into the calculator first? Which part? Anyone who did the notes last night remember? I circled it in red and it has a special name. The discriminant, yeah. So it's the part that's underneath the square root. We plug that into our calculator first, and we just want to know what that number is. So I'm not going to use a square root sign. I'm only going to type that part into my calculator. So 10 squared minus 4 times 3 times 4, and you can use the times button or you can use the parentheses. It doesn't matter. It's going to give you the same answer. So either way you type it in, both of those methods are good for typing it. And when you guys type it in, what discriminant do you get? 52. So if we go back to the top of our paper for the for the 3 different types of discriminants do we get, does our discriminant equal 0? Is it less than 0 or is it bigger than 0? It's bigger than 0, so we're going to have 2 real answers. So that means that when we finish the problem, we're going to have 2 answers that kind of make sense. If we were to graph this problem on a calculator, we would see that it has 2 x-intercepts. They'd be visible. We're not going to have the 2 imaginary answers where there's I in there. These are going to be 2 real answers that we can find. Okay, so 52 is the discriminant, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to rewrite this and make it easier to plug into the calculator as a whole. So x equals negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 52 divided by, and then what's 2 times 3? 6. Okay. So that is the whole quadratic formula altogether. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to type this in, and the whole thing is as a fraction, so we're going to type it in like a fraction. So how do we get a fraction on our calculator screen? Anyone remember? You start with the green button. We're going to type alpha, that's the green button, alpha y equals, and we're going to use option number 1. So alpha y equals, and use option number 1. And then we're going to type negative 10. The negative button is the one underneath the 3. So negative 10 plus, and we're going to type the square root of 52. So the square root is right above the x squared button in blue. So we have to do second, we have to use the blue button, second x squared. That's how we get the square root in there. So negative 10 plus the square root of 52, all divided by 6. Is everyone able to type that in? Negative 10 plus the square root of 52 over 6. I got a whole table not typing anything. So all of you guys should be typing. Are we typing it in? Okay. You want to make sure you can type this before we take a quiz tomorrow. Yeah. Oh, now we're interested. Yeah. So we are going to type alpha, the green button, alpha y equals, option number 1, negative 10 plus, and then the square root is right here in blue, right above this button. And so to get that, we hit second x squared. It's the x squared button, and that's how you get the square root on there. 52 over 6. And it's going to give you a weird decimal. And so I'm going to write negative 0.465. So the third, I always do 3 decimal places. You'll notice that on all my answer keys, it always just has 3. And so the third decimal was a 4, and the 4 was followed by an 8, so I rounded up. Okay, so this is one answer, and then the other answer is we're going to get by putting a minus in. So I'm going to go up. I'm going to hit an up arrow. And so I have this highlighted, and if I press enter, it's going to copy paste it for me. And then I can just hit the back arrow and go to where the plus sign is and type a minus sign on top of the plus sign, and then I'll get my second answer. So I don't have to plug it in twice. And what are you guys getting for your second answer? Should be another decimal. Yep, perfect. Negative 2.8 6, and then the 8 is followed by a 5, and since it's followed by a 5, that tells us to round up. So those are the two answers. Okay. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you'll have answers like number 1 where they're kind of nice. These types of answers are problems that you would have been able to factor. Sometimes we'll have answers like number 2 where you're taking the square root of a negative number, and so you're going to have an I in the answer. And then sometimes we'll have answers like number 3 where we're going to have decimals. So those are the 3 types of answers you could have. Now, if we do another example problem, what type of example problem would you guys like? What would be helpful? Do you want answers that have I's in them to practice? Do you guys want decimal answers to practice? What type of example do you guys think you would like to see another one of? The I's? Okay. Do you want an I like this where we had to simplify it by hand? Or do you want to see an example of an I where you get the I and then you just leave it there? Simplify? Okay, so let me find... with the I's, we don't do I's with decimals. We actually leave them. Hold on, I'm trying to find one that has an I in it. Include problems with no real solution. Okay, so go ahead. This is going to be example 4. All right, so we're going to do n squared. Actually, hold on. I need to use a different. Trying to get an I one that, oh. Okay, this one we're going to do 8n squared plus 2 equals 0. So this one's kind of ready to start already, but kind of not. The reason it's kind of ready to start is because it already equals 0. The reason it's kind of not ready to start is because it doesn't have all of the terms that we're used to having. It's missing something. Can anyone tell what it's missing? We normally have a number for A, a number for B, and a number for C. And it only has 2 terms, so it's missing one of those. It's missing the B term. So what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this, and we're going to write it with something for every single term. So I'm going to rewrite this as 8n squared plus 0n plus 2. And the reason I'm going to do that is because if you put a 0n, then that term, if you have a 0 there, that term could have disappeared and it wouldn't make the problem any different. So this problem and that problem are exactly the same. You could have a 0 there or not have a 0 there, and it's the exact same problem. So at this point, we can clearly see what all 3 of our letters are going to be. We have that our A value is going to be 8. our B value is going to be 0, and our C value is going to be a positive 2. And you'll notice that when I circle the numbers, I always circle the sign with the number because I want to be sure if the number is positive or negative. So be careful to keep track of that. It doesn't really matter when it's a positive, but it matters a lot when it's a negative. So it's just a good habit to get into. Okay, so if we do the quadratic formula, the very first thing is that we start with is we write negative b. So if I'm writing negative b, what should I be writing? Negative b. What should I write? It's weird, but it's okay. What should I write? Negative 0. Negative 0 and positive 0 are the same thing. But for the formula, we'll go ahead and write it because that's what the formula says is negative b. So negative 0 plus or minus the square root, okay? And then the next thing in the formula is b squared. So what should I write? 0 squared minus 4, and then we're going to do times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Perfect. Okay. So the next thing we do is we're going to figure out what the discriminant is. So we're going to take this part right here and we're going to plug it in the calculator. We're not going to use the square root. We're just going to plug this part in the calculator. So 0 squared minus 4 times 8 times 2. And you can type it in like that, or you can type it in with the parentheses. It does not matter. And what do you guys get? Negative 64. Okay, so we have a negative 64 underneath the square root. Negative 0 and positive 0 are the same thing, so I'm just going to put a 0 here in the front. And then on the bottom, we have a 2 times 8, which is what? 16. Okay, so at the point that we see a negative underneath the square root, we have to put our calculators away. We're not allowed to use our calculators anymore. We are done with the calculators, okay? So now I see a negative with the square root. What do I do with the negative? I don't get to leave it there. I have to fix it. How do I fix it? You might have to look at example 2 in your notes. We take the negative, we do something to it. At the very end of the problem, we're going to have imaginary answers. Not divide it. It's a really simple fix. We just can't leave it negative underneath the square root sign. So if we see a negative under the square root sign, what do we do? Somehow we changed this one into a positive, but what did we have to do when we did that? Anybody know? wrote you guys some hints up here too to remind you from Math 2. Anytime you have a negative underneath the square root, you do this with it. So negatives underneath the square root mean that you have an imaginary number. So we're going to take this, we're going to make it positive, and then we're going to stick an I in the front. So what you do is you're communicating to the person who's looking at your work, oh, that was a negative underneath the square root. That's not possible. That means my answer just switched from something that is real to something that is fake. And I'm showing you, as the person who's looking at my paper, yes, I realize this is now a fake answer. But we're still doing the math anyway. So we can continue on with this problem. What's the square root of 64? 8. Okay, so we're going to say, all right, we have plus or minus. We had a 0 in front, so now I can kind of ignore the 0 because 0 doesn't really do anything. 64, that was 8, so plus or minus 8i over 16. If we have a fraction 8 over 16, does that reduce? Yeah, what does that reduce to? So 2, what becomes 2? So the 8 would become a 2, and what would the 16 become? So we have to think about, if we're going to reduce the fraction, we have to think, I'm going to take the top and divide it by something, and I'm going to take the bottom and I'm going to divide it by the same thing. Okay, so if we're going to take the top and the bottom and divide it by the same number, you could divide the top by 8 and get 1. Divide the bottom by 8 and get 2. Is that what we want to do? Divide the top. Okay, so take the top, divide it by 8, get 1. Take the bottom, divide it by 8, and get 2, and then it equals 1/2. We agree with that? That works? Okay, so our answer is plus or minus, and you can say 1i over 2, or you could just say I over 2. So this is an imaginary answer. It is not real. If we were to graph this function, it would be it would not cross the x-axis. There would be no x-intercepts. So these answers that we found, they are fake. They're not real. Okay, let's get out the sheet from yesterday that you had the 8 factoring problems on it, because the other half of this sheet is what we're going to do today. So if you guys, if you didn't take your notes, you need to go take your notes now. Anybody who didn't take their notes last night? And then if you guys did take your notes, you can stay over here. So here's the sheet we have. So last night you did 1 through 8. Today we're going to do 9 through 16. So if you look at any of the problems, 9 through 16, is there one you guys want to do? So we're going to use the quadratic formula, 9 through 16. Anyone who was gone yesterday, I think the extra copies are over in the piles over there. So if you need a copy because you were gone yesterday. So anyone who didn't get their notes needs to get up, head over there, go take your notes. If you got your notes done already, you can stay over here. We're just going to work on doing the quadratic formula. Yeah. Huh? Yes, because I need the notes to be physically here in class. Okay. All right. Jimani, do you have your notes? Thanks. Thank you. All right, this is what number 14 says. All right, so what do we need to do first on 14? Yeah, we need to move the 11x squared. Okay. And we need to move the 6. So this equals 0. Okay. Hey guys, take a seat. So 22 minus 11 is 11. And then we got 5x. Negative 17 plus 6 minus 11. Okay. And then what do we do? What do we do? So we got 11x squared plus 5x minus 11. Here's the quadratic formula that we're going to use. So what should we do? Find your A, your B, and your C. So there's our A. There's our B. There's our C. Matthew, go ahead and put the markers down because we're doing number 14. So we have x equals, and what should I be writing? Negative 5, because we got negative b. Okay. Five squared. Okay. 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 And then we make sure that this second 11 that we're plugging in has a negative with it because it's the C value. So this is our A value, this is our C value, and the C had a negative with it. Okay? So all of this is divided by what? Two times. Perfect. Okay. And then what do we plug into the calculator first? Yeah, we do the discriminant. So we were going to do the stuff underneath the square root sign. Okay. So we can type it in like this, or you can type it in like that, whichever way, doesn't matter. And what do you guys get? 509. Perfect. Okay. So plus or minus square root 509. Okay. We got -5 in the front. What do we have on the bottom? 22? Okay. So if this had been a negative, we would have made it a plus, put an I, and then we would have stopped. That would have been the very end of the problem. We would have been finished. But this isn't a negative. That means we have to plug this in. And because 509 I don't think is a perfect square, we're going to get decimal answers. So how do we type in the fraction? Alpha y equals, so we're going to do green button y equals. Get that fraction typed in. There we go. Okay, so -5 plus, how do we get the square root? Second x squared, 509 over 22. Okay, and what decimal are you guys getting? Anybody? 0.798? Okay. And I think that I probably did this if you look at the answers. I probably put x squiggly like this. And all that means is I wrote a decimal and I cut off some of them. That's what that means. It means approximately. So you can see up here, I put an equal sign. Equal sign means this is the perfect answer. If you're doing math, it means this is the perfect answer. Squiggly means I wrote decimals and I cut them off. I do not expect you to do that, but you'll see me do that on my answer keys. Okay? All right, and then how do we get the second answer? So we go up there, we highlight it, press enter, so we're copy pasting it. And then what do we need to change? Take the plus, make it a minus. Okay, so we've got the other answer is -1.253. Okay, so if you guys look at the different answers, what letter is that? F? Okay. Perfect. Okay, is there another problem on the sheet we should look at? I was going to say number 11 looks really simple, but sometimes the simple ones are confusing. So 11 is really simple. Yeah, the 0 in the front. Okay, so let's do number 11. Okay. 11 is 0 equals 20 minus 5x squared. It's simple. The 0's in a weird spot, and it's out of order. Okay. So now if you don't like the 0 on that side, you can always say, I'm going to move it over to the other side so I feel better about it. So that could be your first step. So if I look at this, I can see there's an x squared term, there's a number, there is no just x term. So that means that something's missing. So what should we do for the term that's just missing? Put a 0 in for it. Okay, so what term do we write first? Do we leave it like this, 20 minus 5x squared? Do we leave it in that order? No. What should we write first? Okay, and the 5x squared has a negative in front of it, so we're going to make sure that we keep the negative in front of it. So I'm going to say negative 5x squared, and then I'm going to do what Emma said, I'm going to put a 0 next, plus 0x. And then if you look at the 20, is the 20 positive or is it negative? Is that a positive 20 or a negative 20? Positive. You can tell it's positive because it's just sitting there. It doesn't have a minus in front of it. It's just positive. So I'm going to write positive 20 equals 0. Now, when we were doing the factoring day, I said that these should never be negative when we factor because it makes your life harder. With the quadratic formula, it does not matter. With the quadratic formula, a negative here is fine. Now, if you wanted to make this positive, you could just take all this stuff and move it to the other side of the equation. That would be fine, okay? But for the quadratic formula, having a negative a value does not make the problem harder, okay? Do you guys want to leave it over here, or do you want to move it to the other side and make it positive? Move it? Okay. So how do we move a negative 5x squared? You add 5x squared, okay? So we're going to add 5x squared to the other side. How do we move a positive 20? We subtract it. I don't really have to move a 0. I can just write the 0 on the other side instead. Okay. So at this point, now this side is 0 again. So I'm going to have 0 equals... And then over here, I've got the 0, I've got the 5x squared, I've got a negative 20. What gets written first? What do I write first? I put negative 20 first. Do we want the negative 20 written first? What term do we usually have written first? Yeah, we usually want the x squared term written first. Okay, so we're going to write 5x squared first. And then what term do we want to have written next? Which one? The 0. Thank you. And then last, we'll have the negative 20. Now, if you're uncomfortable with the 0 equals on the left side, you can erase it and you can put it on the right side. It doesn't matter where you have the equal 0. So if you're uncomfortable with it on the left side, you can move it over to the right side. Okay, so now what should we do? We have all of our equation lined up. We are ready to start doing the quadratic formula. What should we do? Anybody? Okay, so A, B, C. We are working on the worksheet, and there's extra copies over there if you need one. Okay, so what do I write first? Negative 0, so I've got negative b plus or minus square root of 0 squared, so that's b squared minus 4 times A times C divided by 2 times A. Okay? And then what should we plug into our calculator first? Okay, so the stuff underneath the square root is what we're going to plug in first. And it doesn't matter which way you type it, you're going to get the same answer either way. And what do you guys get? 400. Okay, so our discriminant is 400. Since it's a positive number, that means we're actually going to get answers. So we have 0, and you don't even really need to write the 0. If you want to leave it out, you can. And then 2 times 5 is 10. So what do we do now? What are we doing now? We plug it in. Mm-hmm. So alpha y equals number 1. And we've got square root. After you do some math, some of these problems. Square root 400 over 10. And what do we get? 2. Okay. And then for the other one, I'm going to go up and I'm going to copy paste. Now this time, since I didn't have the 0 in the front, I didn't do 0 plus square root 400. So I don't have a plus to change into a minus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cursor right here. And I want to insert a minus into the problem. And so right above the delete button, you see INS. That means insert. So get your cursor so it's sitting right where my cursor is. Everyone have their cursor there? And then if you hit second delete, now it's ready to let you insert something. And now we can insert the negative because we just want the negative version of the answer. There. Okay, so just -2. 2 and -2. So what letter is that? What answer? Which one? M. Okay. All right, so we have 6 more problems to do, and then the sheet should be finished up between yesterday and today. All right, and let me know if you get stuck on any or if any are weird. We did 11 was one of the weird ones. There is one that when you make it equal 0, it turns into kind of like number 11. So you're going to do another one like that. And then let me know if you guys get to an I problem and that confuses you, if you get a negative underneath the square root and you have a hard time with it. Okay? So you got 6 more problems to do.